When I first read that passage from Jeremiah, the first word that came out of my mouth was, woe. When I got to the end. Not that first half, that was a jumble. But that second half, when I got to the end, I was like, whoa. And that's usually one method I use when I'm reading lectionary lessons. If one of them makes me go, whoa, then I go, okay, that's the one for today, whoa. And sometimes I don't even realize right away the real depth of the passage, but if at least it makes me go, whoa, then I go, I got to dive in further that passage. And do you want to know what my very first thought was after reading that passage? And I know I just mentioned this the very last time I preached, and my apologies, but it's timely, and that is the election. That's the first thing that came to my mind, okay? Because it's what's going on right now. We can't avoid that subject. Because you see, the chances of us living here in Fairfield being carted away to live somewhere else in exile, like they did back in biblical times, the chance of that happening is pretty slim, right? I mean, in our lifetimes, our children's, our grandchildren's even. But we may have a similar sense of living in a different country depending on our political views and how this election turns out, right? Regardless of who wins, some people will wake up on Wednesday, November 9th, and feel their country has changed. Regardless of who wins, some people are going to feel that way, okay? And whether or not it actually will have changed is a different matter altogether. But if you end up feeling that it has changed, then you do well to keep these words from Jeremiah close at hand. For it might feel like simply throwing up your hands in disgust, but this passage from Jeremiah is about the Lord telling us to never give up hope. Okay. Now, I think so often we see people struggling throughout the world, facing difficulties of a kind that we know we never will. And on the surface, we might think, I don't know how I could handle that kind of a struggle. But sometimes I think that because of our selfish, broken human nature, this call that God puts on us today from this book of Jeremiah could actually be a more difficult struggle to overcome. And let me break down what I mean. Say you woke up this morning and you went to your cupboards and you opened it up and there was no food in your cupboards, none. All of a sudden you woke up in the morning and your cupboards were empty. You went to the refrigerator and you opened it up and it was empty too, like no food, okay, literally empty. What would all of a sudden become the first priority of your day? Getting food, right? Because if you have no food and you know you have no food, then you know what your most immediate need is, and you can tend to rectifying the situation. Now, I don't want to sound like solving that problem of not having enough food would be easy. I'm simply saying that not having food in your house is an easy problem to recognize. And therefore, it's a problem that we realize we need to address. Therefore, you know the direction you need to go. I have no food now. Something needs to happen in order that I do have food later, whether that's done by you or by someone else or a combination of the two. And that's where things get more complicated and difficult. But identifying the problem, that's relatively simple. No food. If, on the other hand, you wake up on the morning of November 9th with a deflated sense of enthusiasm for the day, and you go to your cupboards and you open it up, and it's full of food just like the day before, or you open your refrigerator and everything in there looks the same too, but something just off in you, it might be a little harder to pin down and put words to exactly what's changed for you. Everything looks pretty much the same, but somehow you feel like something's different. Because from your perspective, things have changed. You feel like your nation's changed, and you're wondering if you're going to feel this deflated for the next 2 years, or 4 years, or 6 or 8 years. But what does God tell us to do in Jeremiah? He says, build a house and live in it. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. get married and have children, and encourage your children to have children of their own, and embrace this moment. Find something worthwhile in this place and time. In other words, live there. Don't spend your days lamenting about where you live now and wishing you were somewhere else. That kind of thinking is futile and counterproductive. Now, that might sound utterly naive in its simplicity, but truly what we're being told to do here is to change what you can, accept what you can't, and then live this day for what it is. Like I said, I realize that that might sound utterly naive and completely unhelpful. And it might be if I just now said amen and that was the last thing I said, okay? But I'm not going to do it. I'm going to say a little bit more about that, okay? Because I realize it's not that simple and it's not that easy. Before I give you some ideas on how to do this, I want to add that I'm not only talking about how to accept life following the election, because I know that not everybody is that into politics, and some people just don't get as wound up about it as others. But all of us, at some time or another in life, is going to find ourselves, or has found ourselves, in situations that make us wish our lives looked different. That we lived somewhere else, in a different place, in a different time, in a different reality. The same idea applies. Change what you can, accept what you can't, and then live this day for what it is. And I also realize, though, that someone might hear these words of mine and think, well, what about like a woman living in an abusive marriage or a child who is being held as a sex slave? They should just accept it. Those are extreme examples with a completely different set of answers, okay? I'm talking about things like in the middle, okay? If you know someone in some of those extreme situations, then we're to reach out to them, okay? I'm talking about like in the middle. And so now I'm going to suggest some things to help us figure out how to live in this place that we call the present, even if it's not quite where we want to be living, okay? And like I said, the Lord already gave us a couple of ideas. He said build houses. Most of us already have houses that we live in, so that's not going to help us because we've got a house. He tells us to build a house, so some of us don't like to garden, but he said plant a garden. So then, okay, what are some other things? Okay, so the most important thing is to be deliberate, okay? And part of being deliberate might actually be allowing yourself some specific time to grieve for that loss you feel. Because that is a part of your reality, okay? Grieving a loss is part of your reality. So it's okay to set aside some time to do that, but do it on your terms. You decide when to grieve and how long. But don't live in that place. Okay, if you need to revisit that place from time to time, that's okay. Like when you go back and you visit your folks and it's like, it's good to be here, but now I need to leave and go back to my regular life. You know, you can go visit that place when you need to. Like I need to grieve right now, so I'm going to go there. But then I'm not going to stay there. I'm not going to set up my household there. I'm going to visit it. Then I'm going to move back to my life. Okay, on your terms. Then some other strategies for living in that place that you didn't choose to live. One thing is we have to prepare ourselves ahead of time for how to live in those circumstances that are sometimes thrust upon us. In other words, don't wait for hard times to search for answers to hard questions. Okay, ask the what if and the why questions now. Like right now, if things are going good for you, stop and ask those questions. Because when you're in the eye of the storm, some answers might not feel warm and comforting. But there's strength in truth, and that strength can be used to fortify our lives when the storms do come. So ask questions now. Build up your store of answers, or at the very least, learn how to accept answers that you might not really like later. For instance, if all of a sudden your present reality becomes the death of a loved one, that's not going to be a good time to ask, why did this happen? But knowing the sudden death of a loved one is always a possibility, it does us good to spend some time now pondering that question in a hypothetical way when the question's not born out of immediate reality. I realize that might sound like a downer idea to do that, to be like, what will I do if that happens? Well, it's the same logic as buying insurance, okay? That is the only reason we buy insurance, is because we know something could happen. If we didn't think something could happen, then we're foolish to buy insurance, right? That's why we buy it, because we know something could happen. So taking time to ponder heavy questions is not a downer thing to do. It just makes sense. Just don't dwell. You don't need to dwell on it. It's like when your insurance premium comes in the mail. It doesn't wreck your day, right? Unless the premium is really high. That might wreck your day. But it doesn't make you stop and think about, oh my gosh, I have to pay insurance because I could have an accident. You don't think that. You just pay it because you need to have it there. That's what it is to ask those heavy questions in good times. Okay? Another thing you can do to make it a bit easier to live in this place called the present is do things to expand your perception of the world, so that when it starts to feel like it's closing in and feels small, you'll already know it's not small. The world is not a small place. It's very big. And you are not alone in it. What are some ways that you can do that? I have a few favorites of my own. One is reading. Okay, I know that might sound a bit boring, but hear me out on that, okay? Because when you read, you are introduced to new people, new places, new ideas. Whether you read a fictional novel or a hardcore current events magazine, your world is going to be expanded in the process, okay? Just keep this one thing in mind, though, that if what you're reading is keeping you in a frustrated place, try reading something different, okay? Because that's counterproductive. If it's making you stay frustrated, leave it and move on to something that's going to build you up, okay? Same thing can come of watching movies or TV. I know it seems like when we're in church, we want to say, don't watch TV, but we all watch TV. So sometimes there is something on TV and it might not appeal to your neighbor, but it might be hitting you in a way that's like, you know what? This might not be a pleasant show, but it's really hitting me and I'm gaining something from watching this. And that's going to be different for each of us, okay? I read a book once that I loved, and I recommended it to my aunt. She hated it. And she's like, I can't believe that you love that terrible book. And I was like, wow, well, I thought it was amazing. So because we look at things differently, same thing goes for TV and movies. Search out what helps you expand your perspective of the world in a way that's edifying to you. And again, if it's dragging you down, leave it alone, okay? Another thing to try and make living the present a more positive experience is try new things. I have a friend who's in a predicament where her life's sort of in limbo. Her options at present are very limited and her future is uncertain. She could choose to just wait until she knows exactly what her future will be before actually living, but she isn't waiting to live her life. Instead, she and her children are taking swimming lessons. It's like, wow, that's interesting and creative. I never would have thought of that. Like, I don't know what my future is going to be, but might as well take swimming lessons. It's like, wow, that was really innovative. Another thing to try and make living in the present a more positive experience, be the strength for someone else that you know of who's not feeling great about where they're living. It's amazing how much more positive our own lives feel when we spend less time looking in and more time looking out. And I want to add one more thing before I end, and that is that if you absolutely can't find a way to peace in your life, no matter what, like you checked off all these little things and like, no, I still don't feel like good about where I'm living at all, you might need to seek out further besides just yourself, okay? Because not everyone can do this alone. In fact, most people can't. And to tell you the truth, we're not meant to. We're not meant to live life alone. See, we're all here today together. We didn't come to worship by ourselves. We're in community. And life in the present is about community and relationships. And if you think you need a little extra help getting there, then seek that out, because that is what this is about. That's why we gather together. Okay? And even that's a deliberate step forward, and that's the point. So, embrace this time and place in which you live. Give thanks for this day. For the more good you find in this day, the more good this day will bring. I know that sounds hard some days, but God has told us it's true. Okay, amen.